The first time I heard the whisper, I thought it was the wind. It was late, past midnight, and I was sitting on the porch of my sister's cabin, staring out at the dense woods that surrounded it. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves. But then it came, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I froze, my hand tightening around the cold metal of the flashlight I held. "Ellie?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Maggie." I dropped the flashlight. It clattered against the wooden planks of the porch, the beam flickering as it rolled toward the edge. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to run, to get in my car and drive as far away from this place as I could. But I couldn't. Ellie was still out there. My sister had been missing for 3 weeks, and this cabin, her cabin, was the last place she had been seen. I picked up the flashlight and shone it into the woods. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the gnarled trunks of the trees and the thick underbrush. Nothing moved, no one was there. But the whisper came again, closer now. And this time it wasn't just my name. "Maggie, come find me." The cabin had always been Ellie's sanctuary. She had bought it 2 years ago after her divorce and had spent every weekend here, painting and writing and trying to piece her life back together. It was a small, rustic place, tucked away in the woods at the end of a long, winding dirt road. The nearest town was 20 miles away, and the only neighbors were the occasional deer or raccoon that wandered through the yard. I had always thought it was a strange place for Ellie to choose. She had never been the outdoorsy type, and the isolation of the cabin seemed to amplify her loneliness rather than soothe it. But she had insisted that it was exactly what she needed. "It's peaceful here," she had told me once, her eyes distant. "No one can hurt me here." I hadn't understood what she meant at the time. But now, standing in the middle of her cabin, surrounded by her things, I wondered if I had ever really known my sister at all. The cabin was exactly as she had left it. Her easel stood in the corner, a half-finished painting of the woods propped up on it. Her laptop was open on the table, the screen dark and lifeless. A cup of tea sat on the counter, the liquid inside long since evaporated, leaving behind a ring of dried leaves. But there was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The air in the cabin felt heavy, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. And there was a faint, acrid odor that I couldn't quite place. It was the smell of something rotting, something dead. I walked over to the easel and looked at the painting. It was a dark, chaotic mess of colors, with no discernible shape or form. But as I stared at it, I began to see something, a face, twisted and grotesque, staring back at me from the canvas. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. The face was gone, replaced by the abstract swirls of paint, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, watching me. I found Ellie's journal in the bottom drawer of her desk. It was a small, leather-bound book, its pages filled with her neat, precise handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, my fingers trembling as I flipped through the pages. The entries started out normal enough, mundane details about her life, her thoughts on her latest painting, her plans for the future. But as I read on, the tone began to change. The entries became darker, more disjointed, as if Ellie's mind was unraveling. "I hear them at night," she wrote in one entry. "The whispers, they're coming from the woods, they're calling me." I felt a chill run down my spine. The whispers. The same whispers I had heard on the porch. "They want me to come to them," Ellie continued. "They say they can help me. They say they can make the pain go away. But I'm scared. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they want." I flipped to the next page, my heart pounding. The entry was dated just a few days before Ellie disappeared. "I can't take it anymore," she wrote. "The whispers are getting louder. They're inside my head now. They won't stop. They won't let me sleep. They won't let me think. I have to go to them. I have to find out what they want. I have to know." The next page was blank. The entry ended there abruptly, as if Ellie had been interrupted. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. What had happened to her? What had she found in the woods? I decided to stay in the cabin. I didn't have a choice. The nearest town was too far away, and I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. Not until I found out what had happened to Ellie. I spent the rest of the day searching the cabin, looking for any clue that might tell me where she had gone. But there was nothing. Just the painting, the journal, and the whispers that seemed to follow me wherever I went. As night fell, I lit a fire in the fireplace and sat on the couch, staring into the flames. The cabin was quiet. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the occasional creak of the floorboards. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to distract myself by reading, but the words on the page blurred together, and I found myself staring at the same sentence over and over again. My mind kept drifting back to Ellie, to the journal, to the whispers. And then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound like someone breathing just behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound came again, closer this time, and I realized it wasn't breathing. It was whispering. Maggie. I turned around, my eyes scanning the room. There was no one there, just the shadows, dancing on the walls and the flickering light of the fire. Maggie, come find me. The whisper was coming from the hallway. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked toward the sound. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the fire behind me. I could feel the cold air on my skin, and the smell of rot was stronger here, almost overwhelming. Ellie, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer, just the sound of my own breathing, ragged and uneven. I took another step forward and then another until I was standing in front of the door to Ellie's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of darkness beyond it. I reached out and pushed it open, the hinges creaking softly. The room was empty, the bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn. But there was something on the floor, just in front of the bed. I knelt down and picked it up. It was a photograph, a picture of Ellie standing in front of the cabin, smiling at the camera. But there was something wrong with it. The edges of the photograph were singed, as if it had been burned, and Ellie's face was blurred, her features distorted. And then I saw it. In the background of the photograph, just visible through the trees, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by the shadows, but I could see its eyes, two glowing points of light staring directly at the camera. I dropped the photograph and backed away, my heart racing. The whispers were louder now, coming from all around me, filling the room. Maggie, come find me. I turned and ran, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop until I was back in the living room, the fire still burning in the fireplace. I sat down on the couch, my hands shaking, and stared into the flames. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me into my dreams, twisting and distorting, until I couldn't tell where the dreams ended and the whispers began. I woke up the next morning with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was cold and silent. For a moment I thought it had all been a dream, the whispers, the photograph, the figure in the woods. But then I saw it. The photograph was lying on the floor in front of the couch, as if it had been placed there while I slept. I picked it up and stared at it, my hands trembling. The figure was still there, its eyes glowing in the darkness. And now, as I looked closer, I could see something else. There was a faint, almost imperceptible smile on its face. I threw the photograph into the fire and watched as it curled and blackened, the flames consuming it. But the image stayed with me, burned into my mind. I spent the rest of the day searching the woods around the cabin, looking for any sign of Ellie. The forest was dense and overgrown, the trees so close together that the sunlight barely filtered through the canopy. The ground was soft and damp, covered in a thick layer of moss and fallen leaves. I called out Ellie's name as I walked, my voice echoing through the trees, but there was no answer. Just the sound of the wind rustling the leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. And then I found it, a small clearing hidden deep in the woods. The ground was bare, the dirt packed hard as if something had been dragged across it. And in the center of the clearing was a circle of stones, arranged in a perfect ring. I walked closer, my heart pounding. The stones were blackened as if they had been burned, and there was something carved into them, strange, twisting symbols that I didn't recognize. And then I saw it. In the center of the circle, half buried in the dirt, was a piece of fabric. I knelt down and picked it up. It was a scrap of Ellie's shirt, torn and stained with something dark. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The whispers were back, louder now, coming from all around me. Maggie, come find me. I stood up and backed away from the circle, my hands shaking. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and I could feel something watching me from the shadows. I turned and ran, the trees blurring together as I stumbled through the woods. I didn't stop until I was back at the cabin, the door slamming shut behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The whispers were too loud now, pressing against the walls of my mind like a living thing. They had stopped pretending to be Ellie. They didn't just call my name anymore. They laughed, they taunted, they spoke in a language I didn't understand, guttural and ancient, laced with a hunger that made my skin crawl. I sat on the couch, gripping the fireplace poker like a lifeline. The embers in the hearth cast flickering shadows that seemed to stretch and coil unnaturally. Every so often, I'd hear footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. Sometime past midnight, I heard something new, a knock. 3 soft taps on the front door. I swallowed hard, my body frozen in place. The knock came again, 3 precise, almost polite taps. I forced myself to stand, moving to the door with slow, shaky steps. I didn't want to open it. I knew I shouldn't. But something inside me, some primal curiosity, pushed me forward. I peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty porch and the endless stretch of blackened trees beyond. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe the knock came again. But this time it wasn't from the front door. It came from the bedroom door, inside the cabin. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The bedroom door was shut, just as I had left it, but something was behind it, something waiting. Slowly, the handle began to turn. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't grab my things. I just bolted for the front door, yanked it open, and sprinted into the woods. I didn't stop running, not even when the whispers turned into screams. I don't know how long I ran. Time blurred into a feverish haze. The trees seemed endless, shifting and twisting, and the darkness felt alive. Eventually, my legs gave out, and I collapsed against the rough bark of a tree, gasping for air. And that's when I saw it. Not far ahead, nestled between the roots of an ancient gnarled oak, was something impossible, a door. An old wooden door, half buried in the earth, as if the forest had tried to swallow it. Vines snaked around the edges, curling like fingers. The wood was worn and splintered, covered in those same strange symbols I had seen on the stones in the clearing. The whispers had stopped. Everything was silent now. The air was thick and still, like the world was holding its breath. I didn't want to go near it. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run back to my car and never look back. But then I saw something else. A trail of footprints in the damp earth leading to the door. Small, delicate footprints, Ellie's footprints. With shaking hands, I reached for the handle. The wood was ice cold beneath my fingers. And then, as if the forest itself had been waiting for this moment, the door creaked open. I stepped inside. The air changed instantly. It was colder here, impossibly cold, like stepping into a place untouched by time. A narrow tunnel stretched before me, lined with walls of rough-hewn stone. The deeper I went, the more the walls seemed to shift, the stones twisting as though they were watching me. And then I saw her, Ellie. She stood at the end of the tunnel, barefoot, her hair hanging in tangled waves around her face. She was wearing the same clothes she had disappeared in, jeans, a faded sweater, but they were tattered and covered in dirt. I opened my mouth to call out to her, but no sound came. Slowly, she raised her head. Her eyes were wrong. Black, empty, bottomless voids where her eyes should have been. And when she smiled, it wasn't her smile. Maggie, she whispered. But her voice wasn't just her own. It was layered, distorted, as if 100 voices spoke through her at once. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. Ellie, she took a step forward, then another. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. I turned to run you. The walls shifted. The tunnel behind me was gone. The only way out was forward. Ellie, or whatever was wearing my sister's body, tilted her head. You shouldn't have come. Where are you? I whispered. The real you? She let out a soft, hollow laugh. And then from the shadows behind her, something else emerged. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and thin, its skin stretched tight over an emaciated frame. Its face was smooth, featureless, except for its eyes, glowing pits of pale fire, and it was smiling. Ellie turned toward it, and in that moment, I knew the truth. She wasn't trapped here. She wasn't lost. She had brought me here. The whispers hadn't been calling me to save her. They had been luring me in. I don't remember much of what happened next. There was screaming, mine mostly. There was the sensation of falling, of cold hands grabbing at me, of voices pouring into my mind like ink, drowning me in whispers that I couldn't understand. And then, silence. When I woke up, I was outside. The morning sun was bleeding through the trees, casting long shadows over the forest floor. I was lying on the dirt, my clothes torn, my skin covered in scratches. The cabin was gone. Not burned down, not abandoned, just gone, like it had never existed. I stumbled back to my car, dazed, my mind fogged with fragments of nightmare. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Ellie standing at the tree line watching me with those empty black eyes, but she wasn't there. She was still down there, waiting. And the whispers, they were still with me. I could hear them even now, slithering just beneath the surface of my thoughts, reminding me of the terrible truth. I hadn't escaped. I had traded places. Somewhere in the dark, something was walking around in my skin, and it was coming for the rest of them, for all of them, for you. The end.